Hey everybody, welcome and thank you for tuning into my talk. I am Michael Smith, Digital Design R&D Manager for Ford Motor Company. I'm going to get into the talk right away. These are my key takeaways, and I'm not going to read through them because they're literally the bones of the talk. I'll just keep going, soldiering on here. All right, so I know the recommendation from the EWTS folks was not to make too lengthy of an introduction, but I think a bit of backstory is going to be helpful in understanding how I got to where I am today, and how that's part of the overall story being told, right? And so, by way of a timeline here, it shows I've been in the design studio for 16 years. I've spent 3 years as design recruiting manager and 2 years in my latest job as the R&D manager for digital design. And over the course of that time, I've gotten very comfortable wearing many different hats. And I think that's kind of why the first takeaway is get comfortable wearing many hats. Being a creative designer, right, when you show up in the studio, right, day one, you're asked to put on lots of different hats. The primary one is being the hat, the customer hat. You put that on, and being able to empathize with the customer is key. And so in the design process, being able to put on the customer hat, allows you to solve problems for them instead of solving, selfish design problems, like making it look cool. Empathizing with the customer is key to, sort of getting the best out of your design, making it the right design with the right aesthetic for that customer. Some other hats you might wear. I've certainly been asked to think like an engineer, put on an engineer hat, and that's fun. But you don't want to think too much like an engineer, so you take that hat off real quick as a designer. But I think having empathy for what designers do as part of the process of making a vehicle is huge, because that tension, the creative tension of creativity and realism, is really where the magic happens in terms of making vehicles. I think, another hat you might wear is a salesman, right? If I'm putting up my sketches, I have to sell my themes to my bosses. And so, having that sort of confidence and self-presence is huge. Another hat might be working with the fabricators in the shops. We make prototypes and we do we make the vehicles into something tangible well ahead of when the customer is going to see it. And you have to be able to talk to lots of different people. And I think that's kind of, this idea of how designers, over the course of their education, as it were, start to pick this up wearing many different hats. I think, clearly nowadays, thanks to the Zoom boom, we're all comfortable wearing different hats. I've had to become a lighting gaffer for my wife. I've had to become a video producer and a sound engineer. So I think everybody's sort of comfortable these days doing that. What I hope to show you through the rest of the presentation is how embracing this idea of collecting new hats has had a really profound effect on my career. And so the first one is from the design phase of my career, and that's don't fall in love with the sketch. And that sounds like a really easy phrase, and it's really good advice, but it's really tough. It sounds simple in theory, but in practice, it's really tough, right? So imagine if I set the scene for you, if you're a design student and you've just labored over a whole series of sketches that you put on the wall the next day after pulling an all-nighter. You put them up on the wall, and then you just get to watch your instructor tear them to shreds. That's a really sobering and bitter lesson to have hammered home. And if you sort of get too much into loving the sketches that you did, you really are running the risk of heartbreak, right? In a very true sense. And so, this idea of not taking it personally is really rough. But you have to get right back to it. And sometimes that means starting over from scratch, literally just going back to a blank sheet of paper. but it's a skill that you hone over time, and it's something that I did certainly in the 16 years as a creative designer in the studio. And really, what it takes is a mindset shift, right? You got to shift your mindset, and I constantly try to share this with students that I interact with at the various design schools, and that is, in the hopes that they'll benefit from it, right? I say to them, look, learn to love the doing of design. And so it's the process, right? The blank sheet, nowadays, an empty room in VR, right? It's the potential, the rush you get when you get a chance to start solving problems instead of merely creating pretty pictures. I think that's what separates design from just pure artwork, right? It's when you get into that area of solving problems through art. The chance to start something new out of the ashes of a canceled program. It's a really tough pill to swallow, right? But in this way, if you love the doing of design, if you love that process, it doesn't matter what anybody throws at you, right? Or what the assignment is. You're going to always love what you're doing, and it's really convenient that way. Because then you get to wake up every morning sort of looking forward to what you're about to do. And all right, it's no surprise still, it's the toughest lesson to learn at design school. But that not falling in love with your sketch is really a good reinforcement of a growth mindset. And I think that's key. And I've definitely found this useful over the entire span of my career. And that's not just with sketches and renderings. It's applicable to lots of things, and I hope to get into some of those in the next slide. And all right, so the value of mobility. I think this one sounds cheeky because I work for a car company, but there's a different sense of mobility here, right? An example of growth mindset that showed up 5 years ago, back on my timeline, right, is this new hat that I got to wear as recruiting manager for design. And it really became a lesson in career mobility. It came about because I started to, this is one in my time as a senior designer, I started getting more and more involved with and volunteering with the activities that we do down at the design schools, right? These are student projects that we run at different colleges in the United States. And I did this because I wanted to stay aware of and sort of knowledgeable about trends in techniques and tools that the students were using. And that was amazing and fun and very engaging. And then when I learned that student projects is how we flow students into offers for internships, I volunteered to take charge of an internship for a summer. And I just kept doing that more and more because it felt right. And I think that sort of being open to a drastic change was kind of big. And so I began working for, and eventually I took over the role of recruiting manager in design, where I got to wear even more hats. I got to wear project management hats. And I was in charge of running and coordinating and funding all the student projects that we ran at Ford. I got to do more traveling. I got to learn a whole bunch of stuff about HR. And I think the biggest change in the role, right, putting on this new hat, was what I had to give up, right? And so, quite literally, I had to give up my designer workstation, my really cool tools, and that place was a laptop. And so giving away these tools was very discomforting, right? It felt like I was sort of, a very big chunk of my soul was departing with these tools. But I knew it would help to grow the design organization. That was the reason why it felt good, because now I was going to find the people that were going to do the designing. And it's very much a point of pride now that I can point to vehicles that have come out very recently and say, I hired those people that did that. That's pretty awesome. Now I have a much bigger catalog, right, of not just vehicles I've designed, but ones that I helped on indirectly by hiring the people that did those cars. And so in a fun way, during that time, it was also the time when I purchased the first gen HTC Vive headset, and I'd readily concede that, right, this is probably a result of the fact that I was missing doing stuff with my hands. So more on that later. Um, Wanting to be creative, right? I missed that a little bit, but the biggest benefit to being laptop based that I can share was this idea that wherever I was with my laptop, that was where work happened, and that'll show up later, um, later down the line here. And it's also during this time that I first dabbled with working from home, which is kind of ominous, prescient foreshadowing here. So don't get comfortable. Let's talk about that VR headset that I bought. It had nothing to do with recruiting. It had everything to do with being a nerd. And I use that term very affectionately because I think nerds are cool, and I'm one of them. And about a year into playing with VR, there was a video that showed up on YouTube, and it was this guy, with a headset on. He was drawing lines in space, and it was a car, and it was in an unreleased app called Gravity Sketch. Well, I fired off an email to that dev team and said, "Hey, I want to be involved in this." They said yes. Boom! Now I'm on the beta testing team, and the testers and I were working with the devs to work on the functionality and get this app to be improved and usable. And there was a point when it reached sort of a critical mass where I knew my instinct was telling me this is going to be big, and that culminated in an official relationship, right, with Ford and Gravity Sketch. That's well publicized at this point. And between you and me, I'm pretty sure the fact that I came from design and that the championing of this implementation of Gravity Sketch at Ford is what landed me my newest hat, which is the R&D manager. And I think, constantly being the champion of new things, one of the responsibilities is you get to be responsible for making people uncomfortable, right? So getting used to this idea of being the source of discomfort is huge in R&D. Humans like things the way they are, right? We like order, we like consistency. And some of you are already noticing that I've made this slide uncomfortable by leaving the top left and top corner orange, and it makes it look like somebody did a bad job organizing this slide. I did that on purpose, just to make people uncomfortable. I hope it worked. And so, here's me and here's everybody else. Everybody else is always uncomfortable, and that way I know I'm doing my job. And one of the things about work from home has been discovering lots of different things. One of them is any YouTube video by a gentleman named Simon Sinek, and I'll let you can just search his name and watch some of his videos. They're all great. But where he talks about the finite game and an infinite game, I'm going to paraphrase him and just say that I think what's great about R&D is it feels very much like playing an infinite game, right? There's no hard set rules. There's no winning. The rules are always changing. And we'll get to that right now. So planning for the pivot. I'll say when people ask me, what is your job? I say the primary function of my R&D team is to find tools and technologies that improve the lives of designers. And having been a designer, this is really where it hits home for me, wearing this hat. And so that could be software, it could be hardware. Sometimes it's a combo of two, solution that integrates both. But if it lets people design faster or better or more collaboratively, man, we try to jump all over it. And in many ways, we're always incrementally flirting with this question: what if we invented car design right now? Right, that's the value of R&D. It's an attempt to plan for the pivot. But that question, what if we invented car design right now, brings us to March 13th, 2020. And that's when circumstances, you might have heard, on a global scale, on a worldwide scale, asked us that question of our entire organization. And it was really kind of a big thing. So COVID came along and smashed the accelerator pedal on several initiatives that were previously sort of binned as, hey, that'd be nice to have. or let's proof of concept that for a while, or it changed all that, right? The planning for the pivot became execute the pivot. There was some scrambling for sure, but looking back, there were enough pieces in place to make that transition from work at work to work from home actually work. And it was an exciting time for sure. Before March 13th, my responsibility diagram looked like this on the left-hand side. And you can see it sort of flows in a very traditional way: innovate, research, develop, deploy, and scale. And boy, did things really changed after. And that's because that Friday, my boss and my VP of design showed up with a list of names on a Post-it note and said, "How fast can you get VR into these people's houses?" And there you can see how the right-hand side shows how the script really changed. You know, it's deploy first, scale, then do some innovation and develop and research. And I think what's really cool is, even though the script got flipped, all credit goes to the different 4 teams that allowed us to do that deploy scale quickly. And we did some innovations for sure to smooth out some bumps. But after that initial shock period, we were able to get back to the R and the D of our responsibilities. And I think it's important to note, just to be truthfully fair, right, that that VR wasn't only limited to those executives on that list, right? That initial list. Eventually, we rolled it out to everyone who would ask for it, and I think that was part of the whole success of where we are right now. Another example of a proof of concept that was scaled up quickly was telepresence robots. And granted, our robots don't look like this. They're a little bit more non-humanoid, but they have enough capability for our employees to dial in and check on stuff that's happening in the Clay studios. And I think that's important. Something that was a novelty pre-COVID is now used on a daily basis in our work from home mode. And additionally, I think it'll continue to be valuable because Ford earlier this year announced a hybrid work model that will be flowing into probably next year. So the next thing is about having fun in VR. And so I didn't do any live demos of VR because you should just get out and do VR. I can tell you how much fun VR is, but until you just go out and do it, I wouldn't want to make you sick by having you watch me do VR on a 2D screen. I have a great team that's filled with people ready to go extra miles to ensure that everyone can have fun in VR. And so what you see here is an example of some design executives in a collaborative review session. And the vehicles here are from Team Fordzilla. This was a esports virtual racing car design. And in this piece of software is from Autodesk. It's called VRED. And what you're seeing here is 4 people in 2 countries in 3 different time zones, all interacting in the same virtual space. And not only did they have fun, but it was really fun to be involved with this project and sort of watch the magic happen. Even more personal fun for me, right, is anything to do with creating in VR. And so there you can see my haircut hasn't changed since the day this picture was taken. But if you haven't seen Gravity Sketch, the barrier to entry is very low. It's completely free. And so if you know anybody that has a VR headset, I don't think there's too many caveats to this. You can ask them to load Gravity Sketch and just start having fun. It's mind expanding. It becomes creative meditation. And I think in terms of when you talk about creativity as like a flow state, VR is one of the more interesting new ways of getting into that flow state very, very easily. It allows you to design from the perspective of the customer at 100% scale. So that race car you're seeing in front of me is maybe 4 feet long in space, but it was designed at 100% scale. So I know I fit in that car, and I'm 6'4". So that was on purpose. And I think where we're taking Gravity Sketch is, the plan is to take advantage of this feature called CoSketch and keep adding more and more voices to to the conversation, because CoSketch is a virtual environment where we can all join together and do designs at the same time. And it's way more efficient to operate remotely. And this increase of virtualization that's sort of happening with our design process makes this type of thing really, really easy to utilize. And I'll tell you a real quick story. One of the cool ways that one of our teams has used it is they'll use CoSketch sessions in place of WebEx meetings. And it's, not a disparaging comment about WebEx. It's just being in a virtual space where you have, your designs are all around you and there's 3D models there, and your design team is with you and you're talking it out real time live. It's way more fun. And so the last thing we'll talk about here is listen to what the kids are telling you. And I'll try and tell this story real quick so that I keep some time for Q&A. Another thing that changed after March 13th was our internships and how we ran them. So we went virtual, but with some pretty unique twists. For the first round, first ever virtual interns, we didn't send them the normal high-powered workstations that we would send. We'd have equipped designers with. And so they had to use whatever they had on hand. And then something really cool happened, right? So with the realization that they wouldn't be able to do anything that was Ford secret because they didn't have Ford computers and they were working on their own systems, we sort of pivoted saying, look, that's not a bad thing. This is a good thing, right? So we incorporated them into the Fordzilla project, which was a non-secret public-facing design exercise. And then we said, look, let's take advantage of this fact. You're unrestricted with what you can do and what you can share with us. And so then we stopped talking and we opened our ears. And then we said, look, time to have you guys show us what you would use and what you would utilize. And this is the result of it. What you see here is a Miro board zoomed all the way out to show the entire project. If you don't know about Miro, we learned then that we had never used it before. It's a web-based whiteboard app that they introduced to us. This is the entire internship experience laid out, and it's just one massive collaborative browser space. And it's pretty wild. They ended up doing their final presentation on this Miro board as well. But this is the entire archive of the design process from their summer. It's the initial kickoff brief. If I pointed to it, I don't know if it would show up with a mouse, but I can point you to where the kickoff brief is, where they did research, where they did all their referencing, all the reference imagery. They threw in some memes because they're creative and fun kids. Tons of notes, critique sessions, 3D sketching from Gravity Sketch, designs in Blender, designs in VR. All the way to an Unreal VR experience that they capped off their internship with. And I will say that one of the success stories that came out of this was Blender, in that we did their final presentation and they shared it with the design organization at Ford, and we learned afterwards that there are a lot of people in Ford design that were aware of Blender, but just frustrated that they didn't have access to it. And so my team and I did some internal searching and learned that Blender was already started by someone at Ford, and we sort of picked up the reins and took it across the finish line. And that's a hopefully informative sharing of what we've done at Ford in terms of how to react to and respond to the sort of changed world of COVID. And I thank you for watching, and now it's time for Q&A.